master's program. A big shout out to the TAM students. I see lots of names. And of course, always welcome to our Euro majors and all other students that are joining us today. Thanks for coming. Thanks to everyone for coming, friends, faculty, staff, community members. It's really great to be on here and to be able to have an exciting discussion today. As we were just talking, this less than 2 weeks ago, the Germans voted, and there's a lot to discuss. And it's, who knew elections could be exciting? No, of course, we all know that quite well, don't we? I'd like to give a big thanks to the German Embassy, who is supporting today's event. Through their Campus Weeks initiative, we were lucky enough to be selected, and today's event is part of that. And we're, of course, very lucky to have a representative from the German Embassy to tell us all of his thoughts. And I'm going to turn it over to Dominic Nyhuis now, who is our DAD, or German Academic Exchange Council visiting scholar, visiting professor. Dr. Dominic Nyhuis got his PhD in Mannheim, and believe it or not, working on elections. He's an expert in German and European politics and takes a particular interest in German elections and the legislative process. And so, thank you so much, Dominic, for, we're grateful to have you at UNC, and we're grateful to have you moderating today. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to the German Embassy. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. So now it falls to me to introduce our panelists. They are a little too accomplished, so their CVs are a little long. I've tried to condense it as much as possible. So, I'll try to keep it short so you'll hear more from them. So we have Christiane Lemke, who's a professor of political science and the director of international relations and European studies at the Institute of Political Science at the Leibniz University in Hanover. Professor Lemke has been a recurring DAD visiting scholar at UNC Chapel Hill since '88, and she's also been involved in the Center for European Studies for many years. Christiane Lemke has held the Max Weber Chair at New York University from 2010 to 2014, and she's been a visiting scholar at various American institutions over the years. Additionally, Professor Lemke has served as the director of a German state parliament in 2006-2007, and Professor Lemke's academic interests include European politics, democracy and governance in the EU, transatlantic relations, comparative politics, political theory, and American politics. She's author and editor of numerous books and articles, including Germany Today, Politics and Policies in a Changing World, and most recently a book on the 2020 US presidential election. Then we have Markus Teglas. He has served as Minister Counselor in the political department at the German Embassy in Washington, D.C. since 2021. His responsibilities include transatlantic relations and US domestic policy. Prior to that, he was Chief of Staff for the Minister of State for Europe in the German Foreign Office. He joined the Foreign Service in 2013. From 2008 to 2013, he worked as Chief of Staff in the German Bundestag. Markus Teglas holds an MA in European Studies from the University of Frankfurt-Oder and an MA in Philosophy and Musicology from the Free University of Berlin. He's also worked as editor in several German publishing houses. Our third panelist is Helga Welsh. Helga Welsh is Professor of Politics and International Affairs at Wake Forest University. Her publications have focused on the history and politics of the former East Germany, German unification, transitional justice, the reform of higher education in Germany, and democratization processes in Central and Eastern Europe. Among other things, her articles have appeared in Comparative Politics, German and Society in West European Politics. Her most recent book is Germany Today, German Politics and Policies in a Changing World. If you've paid attention, I've said that before, so that's co-authored with Christiane Lemke. She's also one of the editors of German History and Documents and Images, a project administered by the German Historical Institute in Washington, D.C. And she served as co-editor of German Politics from 2014 to 18. And then finally, we have Konrad Jarausch, who's the Lurcy Professor of European Civilization in the Department of History at UNC Chapel Hill. Professor Jarausch has written and edited about 40 books in modern German and European history. Starting with Hitler's seizure of power and the First World War, his research interests have moved to German unification, the nature of the East German dictatorship, as well as the debate about historians in the Third Reich. More recently, he's been concerned with interpreting 20th century German history, the learning processes after 45, cultural democratization, and the relationship between Honecker and Brezhnev. His books include Out of Ashes, A New History of Europe in the 20th Century, and Shattered Past, Reconstructing German Histories. as well as recently Embattled Europe, a progressive alternative. Professor Jarausch is co-founder of the Center for European Studies, as well as the Leibniz-Zentrum für Zeithistorische Forschung in Potsdam. And that's it for me. And now I'll turn it over to Christiane Lemke.
Thank you very much, Dominic, for this kind introduction, and also to Katie for organizing this event. It's not the first election we talk about here at the Transatlantic Masters Program at the Center for European Studies in Chapel Hill, but this is probably one of the most interesting, I would say, or the most interesting. And I brought a couple of slides. If you could please pull up the slides for everybody to see. And I will, yes, here it is. So if we could go to the first slide, I think you have to turn the pages, Kyla, which is, yeah. All right, here we have the 7 points I will talk about. Shortly before the elections, I read an article in the New York Times that this was the most boring election in Germany. There was no charisma of the people who ran in the elections. There were no exciting topics. It was a very boring election. And I beg to differ. I think that's a totally false impression. And also looking at the results, I would say it is the most important election since German unification. So my first slide will show the transformation of the party system. And what we see here is, and this is all very surprising, the CDU-CSU, Angela Merkel's party, lost 8.9% actually, and came in only second with 24.1%. But the Social Democrats came in as the major party, 25.7%. They gained actually 5.2%. The AfD stayed about the same, but did lose 2.3%. The Free Democrats did well. They gained a little bit, 0.7%. But again, they are in the federal parliament. Die Linke actually is interesting because they fell under the 5% threshold necessary to enter parliament, but because they have 3 direct mandates, all in the city of Berlin, they will be represented in the Bundestag. The Greens were supposed to be the great winners. They did actually double their percentage points, but they did not come in second or even first, which were some of the predictions earlier in spring, saying the Greens might come in first. We might have the first Green chancellor. This is not the case, but clearly the Greens are here a very, very important party. What I also find important is 8.7% of Germans voted for other parties, 8.7%. That's quite a lot. People who did not choose one of the parties that are already in the Bundestag, but some fringe parties. Voter turnout was high. It was, considering the fact that we still have restrictions due to the pandemic, 76%. So we had a very good voter turnout. But what is important here, and we can now look at the next slide, please. The movement here. What you can see, the CDU, the black line, that's the color coding of German parties, as you may know, lost significantly. The Social Democrats actually lost over time, and in particularly after the 2002 elections, but they did gain in this election. So we have had a neck-to-neck race here. And you see the entrance of the new parties, the Greens, and then the AfD, the far-right party, and the left, changing the landscape, the political landscape, so that we have 6 parties in the Bundestag, which is, I would say, very unusual for Germany. And a lot of observers now say, well, this is very unstable. We don't know where Germany's going. I'm not sure if that is true. I think even with 6 parties, you can really run a good government. And the question, of course, is who will form a coalition with whom? I'll come back to that in a minute. If we can look at the next slide, please. The results by direct candidates, the first vote, and here you see 2017 and 2021, so the last 2 elections. And you can see how the Social Democrats, actually the red color here, won more direct mandates, typically in the north of Germany and in urban areas, whereas the CDU-CSU is strong in the south of Germany, has direct mandates also in the western part. And what is quite striking, the AfD, the far right party, gained several direct candidates in East Germany. And then you see these little green dots here, and you can be sure it's an urban area. The Greens won direct mandates mostly in urban areas. One exception in the far north, in Schleswig-Holstein, that's the district of Robert Habeck. He won the direct mandate. Actually, I think he got over 40%, around 45%. So this is how, you know, the landscape has changed. And I want to look a little more at what is actually happening behind these scenes. If we can pull up the next slide, please. This is only focusing on the CDU-CSU and the movement of voters. 1.5 million did not vote for the Union, but for the Social Democratic Party. That is quite striking. And the AfD lost votes to the CDU-CSU from the far right. And it's interesting that the Linke also lost some votes to the Union. But the most striking movement here is from center right to center left, from the CDU-CSU to the Social Democratic Party. And in the discussion, we can reflect on why that is the case. If we can look at the next slide, please. I have a couple of interesting data here. The CDU loses significantly among women. Women had always been more reluctant than men to vote for the CDU, but in this election, this is very striking. The loss is higher among women. Angela Merkel is no longer there. And I think she was kind of the attractive candidate for many women voting for the CDU in previous elections. And the next slide shows you voting by age. And here we have 2017 and 2021, the last 2 elections. I would like to focus on 2021, this election here. And what you see is that voters under 25 years of age, that is very striking. 21% of those voters voted for the Free Democrats and 23% for the Greens. The Green vote is not so surprising, but the vote for the high vote for the Free Democrats in this election among young voters is really striking. The other thing I wanted to point out here is 70 years and older. And you see that the CDU is mainly a party of the old, if you want to. 38% of voters over 70 years of age voted for the CDU, 35% voted for the Social Democrats. So both parties have a real age problem here in terms of imbalance between votes of the young and votes of the old. And you see only 10% of the under 25-year-olds voted for the CDU, CSU. And for the Social Democrats, it's a little better, but still not very impressive. If we can look at the next slide, results by gender. Here, I was surprised actually to see that it's pretty equally distributed. I mean, men and women voted for all parties kind of more or less in balance. However, the only exception here is the AfD, the far right, mostly male dominated, and more men vote for the AfD. We know that from previous elections, and this is confirmed right here as well. If we can look at the next slide, we see another point which is very, very interesting for us. What are the key topics for voters? And you have number one topping all of the list of reasons why people vote for a particular party: social security. Social security is for many high on the agenda. The second most important topic is environment and climate change policy. We see there is, a high salience of this topic actually arising about a few years ago, has increased in significance, and for a number of reasons was one of the most salient issues this year in the election, followed by the economy and work. That again is an interesting feature. We are still suffering from the fallout of the pandemic and the lockdowns, it is quite clear why the economy plays a major role. When you look at voters for different parties, you see that those who are concerned about the economy and about work and labor voted predominantly for the Social Democrats and the left, because that is high on their agenda in their party manifestos to address the issue of the unequal distribution of wealth, the poverty of children, the precarious work relations for many people in the service sector, in the industry. So that's the preference here. And then dealing with Corona is only number 4 of all important topics. It is still a hotly debated issue in Germany, how to respond, whether to wear masks or not, and so on. But it has lost some of its immediately pressing importance here for people. What is missing is any foreign policy topic. I mean, people did not really think about, European integration or terrorism or, security issues, Russia, China. All of these topics did not really play a role for people in their voting decision. And when you look at the electoral campaign and the TV debates, the debates among candidates, you find that foreign policy topics are really absent. And I think it would be worth looking into why that is the case in the discussion. Why was foreign policy ranked so, insignificant in the public mind, in the media, in the statements of candidates? The next slide is just a beautiful picture here. The city of Berlin and the voting results for the city of Berlin. And what I wanted to show here is that you can see the Die Linke, the left, is strong in the eastern part of the city. This is not surprising. We've seen that in previous elections. The Greens are actually strong in Mitte and in Friedrichshain. A lot of people moving into these very popular areas to live in Berlin. So that's where the Greens have strongholds. And then the Social Democrats, kind of classic districts, they won in previous elections. There is not too much movement in Berlin, but it's probably the only city where all four parties are represented well, meaning Social Democrats, Greens, the CDU, and the left. The FDP has always been weaker in Berlin, and that holds also true for the AfD. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the most discussed question right now in Germany is the question, who will form a government? And we talk about two different models, Jamaica and traffic light or Ampelkoalition. These are both theoretically feasible. They would have stable majorities. Jamaica would be CDU, CSU, the Greens, and the Free Democrats. Traffic light would be the Ampel, Social Democrats, the Free Democrats, and the Greens. However, when you look more closely, you see that most Germans favor a traffic light coalition, Ampelkoalition. I just looked up the recent surveys. 63% of Germans would favor Ampel coalition, whereas a little more than a quarter, 25%, would be in favor of the Jamaica coalition. As time goes on, parties are negotiating. All four parties, the CDU is negotiating with the Free Democrats and the Greens. The Social Democrats are also negotiating with the Greens and the Free Democrats. They are called the citrus parties, yellow and green. They have a tremendous role in the question of who's going to form the next government, because they will be needed for any coalition that will come out of these elections. So they have tremendous bargaining power. Usually the second most important party, which would be in a Ampel coalition, the Green Party, would also determine the vice chancellor. The leader of the Social Democrats, Olaf Scholz, is pretty confident that he will be the next chancellor, but it all depends on the next couple of weeks when parties negotiate in earnest. What is everybody going to give up in order to enter the coalition? There will be compromises. It's quite interesting to see how consensual these discussions are. Everybody is saying, oh, we get along really well. So this kind of consensual pattern of German coalition formation is also true this time around, with the very unusual result of having so many parties in the Bundestag. Most people expect government formation to finish before Christmas, but you never know. If the Ampel coalition will not really materialize, differences are too great, then the CDU might have another chance to enter negotiations. We don't know. It is a complex process, and every party is or should actually keep silent about these negotiations. But of course, the press is speculating. We have surveys who is favoring what. We know about policy differences. So this is probably the most interesting part of the elections, the forming of a viable coalition. I should also add that minority coalitions are not known in Germany. We don't like minority coalitions because they could mean instability. My next and my last slide is about what's next, because that is hopefully a topic we will discuss in the Q&A part. What's next for a newly elected government? I think that one of the key challenges is the Energiewende, or the energy turnaround, which Germany agreed to under Angela Merkel already, but there are more far-reaching statements now about how necessary it is to follow up and establish climate change policy that will really limit the carbon dioxide emissions. And that is clearly one of the major challenges for any government, whether it's a social democratic chancellor or a CDU chancellor. Its a second major challenge is to overcome social disparities. We saw in international comparison that Germany really, in Germany, the gap between rich and poor widened, and the number of families living in poverty, children living in poverty, has increased over the past 15 years, and during COVID, these disparities have even increased further. So I see that as a major challenge for either a social democratic chancellor or a Christian democratic chancellor. And then my last point here is I think that any government, any German government, will have to develop a good policy towards Europe and in the European Union, because Germany is the major country, and there are several key topics on the agenda, like the European debt ceiling, which was lifted because of the COVID recovery program. How long can that last? The Free Democrats are fiercely against this lifting of the debt ceiling. The Social Democrats are now in favor. We'll see. The approach to illiberalist countries in East Central Europe is another major challenge for the German government. Relations with China, and I could go on, relations with Russia, with the United States, all of this in the European context. And I think that there are high expectations on Germany to really play a leading role in the EU to shape policies for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that introduction. I will turn it right over to Markus Teglas for the perspective from the German Embassy.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your kind invitation. Greetings from the German Embassy. I'm Markus, and I couldn't agree more with the remarks from Professor Lemke. In recent years, the German elections weren't always been very exciting. In one recent election, for example, Angela Merkel had a slogan which was simply, "You know me." That was enough for her to win. That has definitely changed. The election 2 weeks ago was in various kinds a very special election. First time in German history there was no incumbent. First time in German history a German chancellor has not been voted out of office. So there was a quite new situation, and as Professor Lemke just stated, the division which we had in Germany between the big parties, the big Volksparteien, popular parties, and the smaller parties, in this sense no longer applies in Germany in this form. None of the parties managed to win more than 30%. And in my view, what this also means is when we have a three-party coalition, what we surely will have, because the former big parties, CDU and SPD, won't be said, they won't be forming a government again. We will not have a classical left-right dividends in this citrus with the Greens and the Free Democrats, and this citrus relationship. We will have, in my opinion, something which is a kind of after left-right dividends. That is something that I would be happy to discuss. But of course, I will say some words about our expectations and our thoughts about the foreign policy, about the European policy. And it's fully right, foreign policy, and that was something for me also very astonishing, played virtually no role in the election campaigns. I find it in the European field even more astonishing, because you have to imagine that European policy is mainly a domestic policy in Germany. For Germany, the European Union is in the heart of the politics. We are in the center of Europe, and for us, it's really decisive how the EU evolves. And just a quick sentence, when you look at the actual European situation, you will probably have noticed that yesterday Poland has kind of neglected that the European law stands above national law, and there's surely a discussion which will only shape the discussion in Germany, but that's of course after election, so it didn't play a role in the election campaign. I think one theory why foreign policies and why European policy didn't play such a big role was, at first there were three candidates for chancellery: the Social Democrat Scholz, the Christian Democrat Laschet, and the Green Annalena Baerbock, and they all are without any doubt are real European. They are really convinced that the European way is the right way for Germany. So there was no difference. The only party which is skeptical about that in Germany is the right-wing Alternative for Deutschland, Alternative for Germany, but that doesn't play a very constructive role. And the foreign policy, I think we will have a more vivid discussion on that. But as you can also see in your own country, I think the COVID pandemics shape a lot of discussion, and that leads always to, in my view, to a more nationalistic approach to politics. And maybe it's just a private Markus theory. Maybe that was one of the reasons why foreign policy didn't play such a crucial role. But it is, of course, to be expected then that will grow stronger. Getting to the transatlantic relationships, the relations between Germany and the US are very good, and that is not only a typical diplomatic sentence one says when one wants to be very polite. You all know that was more difficult in the last years. We had discussions about, also in Germany, about AUKUS. We had discussion about Afghanistan. But after all, beyond any public discussion, the cooperation between our two countries remained very constructive. And this partnership, and that's no secret, I think, will continue to develop with a new chancellor, regardless whether his name is Scholz or Laschet. And that's why transatlantic partnership remains the essential constant in German foreign policy. All those who bear political responsibility in Germany, in all parties, know that the US is our most important partner outside Europe, and we want to remain in dialogue. But as the global balance of power shifts, there should surely be a kind of adaptation in our transatlantic relationships. We have, after the end of the world order, after the Second World War, we have sure a more complex situation in the world. We have multiple points of power, looking at China, looking at the East, looking at Russia, for example. And what that means, that could be the task of the new government, to have a more complex coordination between Germany and the US regarding the differences. And one short remarks which I found interesting to discuss afterwards. The first one is surely the question, but what will change with the new government, with the foreign policy? There are differences between the parties. There are differences, I think, when you look at Russia, it's for me always the most clearest part, where you see a social democratic party which has traditional strong ties to Russia. They have kind of theory that you have to have very close relationships, not always friendly, but close relationships to Russia in order to make a difference. Yeah, this country will not vanish from the world if you are against them. So there is usually more dialogue. And on the other hand, you have, for example, the Christian Democrats, you have the Greens, very, very vocal about them, who are not only very critical. I think all the parties except from the left and the right are critical on Russia, but which are very vocal against a closer cooperation. That will be a difference. China would in my view, also very interesting. And I saw one question when Professor Lemke talked, one question about immigration. Immigration didn't play, thank God, I must say, didn't play a crucial role in this election. And that was purely plain luck that it didn't play a great role, and so it couldn't strengthen the far right. But I think we will have this immigration discussion again when we see a movement from Afghanistan, for example, to Turkey. So that discussion is something that will be discussed, I'm sure, in Germany much stronger, but for the election, it didn't play a crucial role. And that should be enough for my first remarks. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Much. Then I will hand over the microphone to Helga Welsh for placing the German elections in a European perspective.
Okay, thank you, Dominic. So let me also share my PowerPoint. Okay, thank you so much for having me as part of this panel. So as Dominic already announced, I would like to talk about this, how German or how European was this election. So as we already heard from several people, it was an interesting election. And this particular slide shows you that in terms of interest, the electorate, was not much different from 4 years ago. But the electorate was very different in terms of not knowing who will be the clear winner. In fact, so the second bars say, is it already clear today? This is prior to the election, who will win? And only 17% said yes. Whereas 4 years ago, it was 57%. So in that sense, a very interesting election. So here I have a slide, thanks to the Economist from this week, that somehow knew that this was my topic. And so I'm borrowing also their image, which, is a British view that, Germany is looking at kind of a broken mirror here, surrounded by the EU stars. And the heading was that the campaign was unmistakably German, but the result was European. And in terms of the result, they point out the usual aspects: fragmentation of the party system, decline of the two major parties, the complication of coalition talks, and the presence of a populist party. So I'm going to first talk about just how German it was, or maybe not so. So those are the three top candidates that you see on the left. So I want to point out, for those of you who are not so familiar with German/West European elections, they are very cheap in comparison to the United States. So the 2020 election in the United States cost something like $14.4 billion. The 2017 election in Germany cost roughly $110 million. Actually, in this case, the campaign is not so different from other Western European countries, not only because the population is smaller, but we don't have primaries. And the election kickoff was really only in August. So it's a mercifully short election campaign. And then there are, of course, all other factors in terms of TV commercials and so on that one cannot even compare with the United States. So the issue of boring already came up several times. The boring issue really comes up with regard to the campaign, but not the outcome. And interestingly enough, whenever I look back at my folders on elections, it seems to be coming up every time there's a German election. So boring, and I want to say maybe boring can also have some good aspects because it means it's not as highly polarized as in other countries. And in that sense, you know, I think this is a welcome sign. It was also interesting that the Alternative for Germany, the right-wing populist party, really didn't play any role in the campaign itself. I mean, there were hardly any articles about it. Again, several of my predecessors in terms of the speaking here today talked already about it. Immigration really was never an issue. COVID-19 also, you know, it was present obviously, but was not a divisive issue. I want to also say, however, that boring was also the result of another factor, and that is that the candidates really avoided talking about difficult issues. And I think that's also the reason why there really was not a discussion about foreign policy and about European Union policy, despite the fact, and I totally agree, that European Union membership is not an issue in Germany. The only party that mentioned it was the AfD, and the AfD is now even discussing whether it was a mistake to bring up Brexit, because it obviously does not have any platform in Germany. They would probably still say, yes, Germany out of the euro currency, but not out of the Brexit, which, by the way, talking about the European dimension, is also something we saw in France, where Marine Le Pen used to call for a Frexit and now no longer does. So kind of a moderation there. So the key issues we already talked about. Very, very prominent was, instead of topics, we're talking personalities. So there were plenty of kind of minor scandals and prior to the election that involved the candidates. I mean, there were really minor, you know, and not major ones, but they still occupied the headlines. And so the personalization of politics was very clear. And I will show you some slides in a moment about this. I also want to say that the fact that Angela Merkel left the office, and that's not, maybe not typically German, but it's definitely very unusual that somebody who is popular and probably would do well again in the election leaves voluntarily and is not running again. So I think that's something worth noting, but it's also worth noting because she was so dominant the last 16 years that there obviously is no clear successor to her. And we see the consequences of it now playing out within the CDU and CSU. I will come to regional trends in Germany in a moment when I show you some slides. So here are some aspects in terms of personalization. So the media and the campaign definitely suggested that there's a lot of personalization, that is, voting according to who do you think is the best candidate. But when you again look at those two figures that I'm showing you here is, so on the left-hand side, it asks, what is your major motive for voting for a particular party? And only 11% actually said it's for the top candidate. 31% said it's for the top candidate and the positions, the party positions, the program, the electoral manifesto, whereas the majority actually said 54% is that in fact it's programmatic issues that matter. So there's some disconnect, and that disconnect becomes even more important when we look at the right-hand side, and that had maybe has something to do who the top candidates were, because for the SPD it was much more important, and for the AfD it didn't matter at all. So in that sense, just interesting, because I think we all can agree that personalization played a big role. And even in other parliamentary systems, where we even use the term presidentialization of parliamentary systems, meaning that the top office holder gets so much attention in the social media age, and the executive has become much more prominent in all political systems, presidential or parliamentary. So here I want to just say a few words about regional divides within Germany. So Dr. Lemke showed the districts, and here I'm showing you the second vote and the distribution across Germany. And in the news, and that's really the only reason why I'm bringing this up, in the news, there's always this impression that the East is totally right-wing and populist. And of course, clearly they're much stronger in the East, as you also see on the other side, where it says that's how East and West have voted. But I want to point out that the North-South divide is equally important, right? And that has a long-standing tradition. That's not new. So when you look how have East and West voted, I think that you can see that it's not so different, really. For those of you who are not so familiar with German politics, the CDU runs in all of Germany except Bavaria, and the CSU only is present in Bavaria, and all the other slides always talk about it as one party, as the union, because they always govern together at the federal level. The big differences are really with regard to the left party that still is strong in the East, but no longer really being an Eastern protest party. It has lost tremendously there. And then indeed, the greatest difference is with regard to the Alternative for Germany. But I do want to point out that it's not just an East-West division, but there's definitely also a North-South division. So now I'm coming a little bit more to the European perspective. So as I already mentioned, everywhere in Europe, and here I'm really talking Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, in the party systems still are quite different from those in the West, and so I'm going to focus on Western Europe. So there's greater fragmentation in terms of the landscape due to the emergence of new issues and the decline of traditional ones. And people, talk about new issues, immigration, of course, climate change, globalization and inequality. When it comes to traditional ones, religion and class are often mentioned. Of course, smaller parties only have a way of gaining votes if established political parties, particularly in the center, the large parties, provide openings. And here, many of those parties have moved so closely together that their political programs no longer provide alternatives for voters, and that's what I mean here by no alternative. So the blurring of the line means, coming together in the center, and that would be, in the case of Germany, CDU, CSU, and the SPD. And as a result, what we have seen, and that's true all over Western Europe, weakening of party identification and voters either realigning with another party or being open to other parties without really gaining any new party identification. So people have wondered about the ups and downs, in particular for the SPD and the CDU, CSU, but also the Greens. With regard to pollings prior to the election, you see quite some movement there, but also relative stability when it comes to the minor parties, if I exclude here the Greens that have really seen quite a roller coaster here. I also want to point out that there are 6 parties in parliament now, or 7 if we count the CSU separately, but overall 47 parties actually competed. And just to give you a slide from another country, our neighbor, the Netherlands, you see here that we see an equal roller coaster of rides, and actually much more so, and many, many more parties. So I'm comparing several parties in the next few slides, and I picked those parties for 2 reasons. They had very recent elections. I wanted parties that are north of Germany, south of Germany, and west of Germany. Germany is often compared now in terms of party system to Scandinavian parties and party systems, I should say. So I made sure that Denmark and Norway were included. So you see here that the Netherlands and Spain have many more parties in parliament. Even Denmark has 12, Norway 10. So Austria and Germany kind of stand out in terms of a relatively small number of parties, really. And in those countries where we have a high number of parties, they often gather in terms of center-right blocks and center-left blocks. And I want to just say that, of course, electoral systems, and in particular the threshold levels, matter how many parties are elected. So people talk a lot about the decline of mainstream political parties for a number of reasons. Again, a lot of them having to do with the issues that I pointed out earlier, new issues, decline of old issues. And what I did here is I'm showing you the election results, the most recent one, and compare them to the early 1990s. And what I did, I always used the election result that was closest to the year 1990. And you do see that indeed, the mainstream political parties have lost quite a lot of votes. One exception is Norway, the other one is Austria. Austria is kind of an interesting outlier here because Sebastian Kurz is another example of high level of personalization of politics in Austria. And for those of you who follow the news a little bit, nevertheless, he is in trouble at the moment due to alleged corruption affairs. But the point is that Germany is in good company, when it comes to the decline of the mainstream political parties. And just to reinforce this notion, I'm showing a slide that Christiane showed and also before, and you see here is that the two major parties indeed have the lowest percentage of votes since 1949. So here I posited parties, what I call on opposite ends, right-wing populist parties and the Greens. I left out left-wing populist parties that are particularly strong in the southern part of Europe. And here you see that the mixture is actually uneven, that in some countries, when we look to right-wing populists, there's a slight increase, but in both cases, it's not typical really, because in the case of Spain, actually there were 2 elections in 1 year, and in the Netherlands, the populist right-wing party split in 2. But for those of us who are concerned about right-wing populist parties, I think hopefully we may have seen a peak in terms of those parties, always, of course, assuming that immigration will not resurface as a major contention. The Greens, here the picture is also interesting. It's Austria and Germany that stand out again, where the Green parties are doing the best, whereas in the other parties and the other countries, they kind of hold steady or have declined. So now we come to coalition building. So this is where, in particular in countries that are not used to coalition buildings, there's this feeling of, oh God, what is going on in Germany or in other countries? Are they leaderless? And I want to just say, no, they're not leaderless. There's always a caretaker government. The old prime minister or chancellor is still in charge. There's also much less turnover compared to, let's say, the United States in terms of appointment of new positions. In the United States, we know when a new president comes in, there's huge personnel turnover. This is not the case in Western European countries and certainly not in Germany. So just looking at the Netherlands, so the election was in March of this year, and coalition negotiations just started in the last week of September. And at least at the moment, it might look that it's going to be a center-right coalition. Norway also had just elections literally before Germany, and negotiations are already underway. And here the likelihood is center-left. Denmark is an interesting case where there was an election in June. And then a few months later, I think it was actually I can't remember, I thought it was December, but there was a Social Democratic Party together with a few other red bloc parties that is now in government. It is a so-called minority government that works on this principle of confidence and supply. That is, the other red bloc parties, they are not officially coalition partners, but they have vouched to support the Social Democratic Party, which has done quite well, but is also a Social Democratic Party that I should say that moved to the political right somewhat, in particular with regard to immigration issues. In Austria, we had elections in September 2019, and then the government literally started the 1st of January of 2020, and it has a center-right with the Green Party. And then last not least, here we have Germany, and several of the speakers have already talked about this. So let me summarize. I think the center holds, but with diminished vote share, if we just want to look at the two main parties that have governed Europe for most of post-World War II. However, I should say, If we include, of course, parties like the Liberals in Germany and the Greens, then the center holds, even without a diminished vote share. Yes, coalition building is more difficult, but clearly is not insurmountable, the issue, and none of the countries that I have mentioned anyway have approached even closely the record that Belgium holds, which at one point was way beyond 1 year, I think over 500 days until a new government was formed. Right-wing populist parties show staying power, as I put it, but again, as I mentioned before, support may have peaked, and I've focused on European trends with national variations. In some, I would not call it, at least in Germany, not a transformative election, but one that combines stability with change. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So I have not talked to my fellow panelists, but we're running a little late, so I think we should, sort of extend this until 1:30. I'm hoping that I'm not wrecking anybody's lunch plans. If you do have to go, then of course, sign off. If you want, you can start typing in your questions into the chat, and sort of then we'll get to them at the end. But before that, we'll have Professor Jarausch with sort of a more historical perspective on the German elections.
Okay, can you hear me? It's a little bit funny to be a historian and become last, because now we will look backward. And what I basically want to do is talk a little bit about the 2 slides that Christiane and Helga have shown on the party movement. And maybe we could bring one of those up. Do you still have them around?
Shall I do it?
Yeah, that would be lovely.
Okay. Oops. Actually, mine has disappeared, so I need to rely on Kayla, maybe.
Kayla, do you have either one of the presentations?
Yes, I can pull up Christiana's.
Okay,
Actually, hold on. I got it.
Okay.
I think so. Let me go up here.
There it is.
There it is. Play from. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. My experience in American media has been that they don't pay any attention to Germany unless there is some kind of problem there. And then they tend to exaggerate the difficulties. What I want to talk about for a couple of minutes now is the question of the people's parties and the implosion of the CDU as governing party, because in all but 20 of the last 70 years, it was in power. So it is understandable that foreign commentators are worried that there will be insecurity and confusion. If you look closely, the red line, and that again is a kind of an American confusion. Red in America is conservative, and in the whole rest of the world, red is left. Only twice in 72, and then with Schroeder in 98, did the Social Democrats actually have more votes than the CDU, although this does not play out in governing coalitions quite that way. Let's start with the first election in 1949. Adenauer got only 31%, Schumacher 29%, and then there were quite a few smaller parties, altogether 10 parties in the Bundestag. And if you jump from 1949 to 2021, you might almost argue that we're back where we started. So that the issue of people's parties is really only a limited period of time. It took until 1961, until that election, before only 3 parties made it into the Bundestag. And that is the period of classic people's parties. That's when it begins, and it then goes on to just over 20 years. So it is a limited period of time. In 1969, the Social Democrats almost got there, but they started a minority government, the Social Liberal Coalition under Willy Brandt. And then you have only one real win and the continuation of the coalition. So the elections after 1961 until 1983 really have this 3-party system, with the 2 large people's parties being pretty close to each other. You can see it in the lines, even if the CDU tended to be somewhat bigger than the SPD. And then in 83, you have the beginning of the complication, because that's when you get the Greens entering the Bundestag and you have the establishment of a 4-party system. Eventually, of course, you can see it on the graph on the red line for almost a generation. You have the Greens taking votes away from the SPD. And then in 1990, the CDU wins the unification vote again, with the SPD really dropping down into the early mid-30s. But you get the PDS under special arrangement, making it into the Bundestag, so you have a 5-party system. So from 83 on, you basically have a trajectory in which you have more parties competing with each other in the Bundestag. And you see that from 1990 on in the bottom lines, where you have a bunch of smaller parties competing with each other. And this works until the 2000s, until 2009, when the SPD really collapses and goes down from the upper 20s or low 30s or even 40s down to the bare 20s. And the CDU is lagged in that development, but then in 2017 and 2021 also collapses. So in 2017, you have the AfD making it for the first time, and that then creates a situation which is post-Weimar, because what you have is a couple of parties whose share does not decline in 2021, that are not koalitionsfähig, as one says in German. That is, they are not considered by the other Democratic Party to be part of the game. So you're basically losing 1/5 of the electorate and excluding them from the coalition building, which of course also reduces the overall vote of the so-called people's parties. And it creates a situation in which the remaining Democratic parties have to compete for less votes than the other ones. And that, I think, is perhaps a place which is problematic for the future. Not that you can't get strong governments with constructive coalition building, and we are in a situation right now where that needs to be done, almost regardless of whether the coalition is a traffic light one or a Jamaica one. And at present, you're even down to 75% of the vote for Democratic parties. And that in the long run is not constructive. Now, two different things can happen. One of them is that the Linke can disappear altogether. Since it is now under 5% and only still strong in Berlin with Direktmandate, that is conceivable. I've always wondered why the SPD did not make more of an effort to reintegrate the post-communists. I know it has to do with Protestant pastors being the founders of the SPD in the East, but in the Weimar Republic, there were three different left radical parties: KPD, USPD, and SPD. And the USPD was not very strong continually. The question here is the AfD as protest party a replacement for the left? And will it maintain that vote? And will the remaining left voters then go back to the SPD? That is one possibility, to get back to a five-party system. And the other one is, of course, also this question of stability of the AfD. We know that since the beginning, the FDP has been around, although it's gone up and down. And in some local or regional elections, it has gone under 5%, but still it's been remarkably stable. And the Greens, except for one election in which they got in only through their East German members, they have also been stable. So it is the question of what happens to the two newest parties, whether they will make it in the long run. Now, I think we have shown the trajectory from a multi-party system to a three-party system, back to a multi-party system. If the coalition negotiations will be successful, and I'm firmly convinced that that will happen, this will not mean that you have to have an unstable government in Germany. It just means that the future is more open and that the pattern is more what Helga Welsh indicated, namely a general European pattern. I think this is about all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. So I was asked to lead into the discussion with sort of some comments on coalition politics. I will make one comment that I don't think sort of anybody or any of the panelists have made so far, and that's about the electoral system. So one question or sort of one matter that we haven't really discussed is that the electoral system since 2013 has become much more proportional, right? So due to a constitutional court case where the old electoral system, which was more disproportional, so more favorable to the large parties, has become invalidated. And the new electoral system is much more proportional. And so, you know, one implication of sort of this more proportional electoral system is in fact a more fragmented party system. So you could basically say that if there was a political will of the mainstream of the center, would be easy enough to go back to a more disproportional electoral system, one that favors the large parties more. One upshot that we also haven't talked about is this, super large Bundestag with 735 members, which on an international scale is quite extensive, and in the long run, I also think it's not sustainable. So let me stop here and ask for questions in the chat, or if you feel like it, I guess we can also sort of have the raise hand functions, and then I can call on you. Either way works for me. So one question that was posted earlier was the question about immigration. Markus Teglas has already addressed it a little bit. Maybe Christiane, would you like to add another comment on the question of how immigration featured in the election?
Yes, I think I would agree with Markus Teglas that in the election campaign, immigration did not figure prominently. It is nevertheless, it is a hot button issue really for all political parties in Germany, and considering the fact that immigration continues to happen and will probably increase. But I think that the explanation why immigration does not figure so prominently anymore is because the integration of the migrants in Germany has become kind of a key feature. And I think that the AfD is a good, example of how immigration is not divisive as much as it was in the previous elections. I think that's the point. It's no longer a divisive issue. It is an important issue, no question. And all party manifestos talk about immigration and how to make legal migration to Germany easier, how to secure European borders, how to modernize the asylum process. All of this is in the party manifestos, but I think it is not a divisive issue anymore. And the parties in the election campaign did not want to kind of put how we sometimes say, light the fire again. But it is clearly, nevertheless, an important policy issue.
Thank you so much. So all of a sudden, the chat is lighting up. I hope nothing was wrong there. So the first question that we got is there a group or population that is underrepresented in the in the elections? I'm not going to call on any of the panelists, but maybe, yes, Helga.
I make it very brief. I think the one group that comes to mind is people with migrant background in Germany. I don't know in terms of citizenship and elections, but I do know that about 20 to 25% of the German population has migration background, and in terms of representation in parliament, the number did go up from slightly over 8 to slightly over 11%. So there's a positive trend, but in terms of share of the population, definitely this group is definitely underrepresented.
The next question is it a mischaracterization to interpret the result of the election as a referendum on the CDU's handling of COVID?
Well, if you look at it, I mean, the CDU should do much better if it was a referendum on COVID, because Angela Merkel was credited with a very thoughtful, very thorough, and rather effective corona policy. I think that is kind of speaking to there should be a higher share. On the other hand, there were also several scandals in the CDU about, for example, masks, the buying of masks, and some other, I would say, corruptive behaviors of CDU politicians. So I think voters who turned away from the CDU may have had that grievance. But no, I mean, if it was a referendum on COVID, we should see the CDU actually blooming. So other important features came in here in these elections.
We have a comment by Konrad.
Yeah, I would also think that the Querdenker, that is the protest movement, that the size of this grouping is considerably smaller than in the United States. And so it's kind of a projection of American politics onto Germany to assume that.
There's a question on the impact of Angela Merkel's departure on sort of the role of Germany in the EU. Any of the panelists feel up to that one? Markus Teglas, any perspective from the embassy?
It's a very often asked question. I think in one respect, of course, there will be a change. Yeah, she was really what you call an elder stateswoman. She was or is known for her thoughtful, for her very laid back kind of handling things, and that is something that lacks politics sometimes. But one thing is the probable new Chancellor Olaf Scholz is voted for mainly because he has some of these qualities. And the other thing is that, as I pointed out before, the all candidates and all parties are pro-European parties, no question. What I think what will be more important for the EU will be the outcome of the French election next year, where we have a maybe an outcome which could be more important than the German one.
So there's a long question. I'll summarize that one a little bit. So basically, the question is on sort of the three-party coalition. It's already been mentioned. It's the first time in German post-war history that we have a three-party coalition. If we don't, sort of count the two union parties as two, in fact, and they're differences. And so the question is on the difficulty of governing together in a coalition that is sort of so, ideologically diverse, really.
So maybe I start. I don't have an answer. I think that's something that the coalition partners have to figure out. Obviously, what I do want to point out that any kind of coalition is built on compromise. And so there's a give and take. And I think the important part is that the FDP and the Greens will have to emphasize what they agree with, and one is, the modernization of Germany, the digitalization of Germany, climate change, and then, the nitty-gritty detail in terms of how they deal with the debt ceiling and so on, I think remains to be seen. But it's not an impossible task, I would say. It's not easy. I mean, clearly the FDP is closer to the CDU and the Greens is closer to the SPD. But they can also use their differences as negotiation strategies. So I think that's the interesting part to be followed right in the next few weeks.
Well, one way of doing it is to give each of the three coalition partners a part of what their essential program is about, and the compromises will then have to be in the areas where these collide. Because if the FDP gets fiscal austerity and stringency, if the Greens get climate measures, if the SPD gets welfare state things, I mean, these are core elements of their identity, of their Markenzeichen, and it won't be possible to fuss those out or over. That is, their own electoral clientele will insist on their getting some essentials. But if they get essentials that they can point to, they can say, this we achieve only by making the following concessions, then they become tolerable.
I think in the election campaign, it became quite clear that the Free Democrats and the Greens do differ substantially on the climate change issue. I think there are several coalitions where they work together, but in reality, I think that they have very different approaches to how to deal with climate change. The Free Democrats being more business oriented, being against regulations, thinking that the free market will actually help. But the Greens clearly pressure for more regulations, even for a large new ministry for climate change. So I think that is going to be something to watch very closely.
So we have two more questions on immigration, one more on the coalitions. If there's another very pressing issue, then you could submit it now. Otherwise, I think we should close the speaker list and sort of leave it at that. So I'll start with the last one because that's more of a numerical question. So would it be possible to form a coalition without the FDP, but just the SPD, the Greens, and the left? And numerically, that is not possible. So they don't have enough seats for that coalition, and a three-party minority government, that seems rather unlikely to happen. So there's no, that option is not entertained by any of the parties. So then we have two more questions on immigration. The first one is it fair to say that the majority of Germans understand that the country needs immigration to sustain continued economic growth? And the second one, I think we should just sort of address them together. Will migrants in Germany, will they be affected by the elections? Any of the speakers feel up to this one?
Yeah, I mean, will migrants be affected? I found it very interesting that we have more people with what we call in German Migrationshintergrund, migration background, in this new parliament than ever before. About a third of the representatives are people with so-called migration background. Helga rightly pointed out that migrants are still not well represented, but I think that is changing and there is more awareness. So I do think that several groups in German society, like Turkish Germans, who used to be very marginalized in politics, they are better represented, but also people from other regions of the world. And they are part of, the party. They will not just talk about, their migration background, but I'm sure that they will push for policies that promote the integration of migrants in Germany living. But the interesting question is, how will the new government address the issue of increasing migration to Europe? And here the European Union comes in to push for for a better, I should say, distribution of migrants, refugees throughout the European Union. That should actually be a major task for the new government and is very, very difficult to accomplish, as we have seen in the past years.
So on the question, do people in Germany understand that migrants or immigrants are necessary to sustain economic growth? I would say I'm not very optimistic about this, that the majority is convinced. At the same time, I should say that the quite successful integration of the migrants that came in 2015, 2016, 2017, I think has set a positive example. And so the anxieties have definitely died down. But as we have heard before, it is a topic that can easily be resurrected when in particular, should the issue of uncontrolled migration come up again. I think everybody is for skilled laborers. That's not the issue, right? The issue is migrants coming with lots of young people who need education, who need training, which provides opportunities, but also costs. It's a topic that can, as we know, also in other countries, that can easily be exploited.
Different Germans, I think, have different opinions on that. I think the industry is looking for skilled labor and therefore hopes to find that. Then there's the question of pensions and an aging society that, even on a very simple practical level, needs folks that can help elderly people. Then there is sports. As long as the national soccer team is winning, then having Black players and having players, Turkish players and so on, is great. Although on the local level, when they show up in the village team and so on, there's still a certain amount of racism going on. So, abstractly, generally, I think there is an understanding that immigration is needed. Practically, it has to do with fears and opportunities and jobs. And we can only hope that the issue can be managed in such a way that there is not another great flare-up of anxiety.
We do have a representative from the German embassy. There's one more secret message that I got, and I think we should address it. And that is the question on the Afghanistan situation, and the question whether there is any sort of interactions about the Afghanistan situation, and then especially with regard to refugees, whether the U.S. is in any kind of talks with Germany.
Yes, actually, it is. There is also on two kinds. Of course, we are speaking. We have a very constant, very vivid, very fruitful discussions with the U.S. side, but we are also working on to get fugitives or to get Afghan people out of the country, as do the US. So at the end, that won't be enough. Yeah, clearly put. But we are working on different levels on it. Yeah.
Right. We've really taken up as much of your time as I think we can. So thank you very much to all the panelists. I think this was very informative, a lot of information for you to sort of process. So thanks again to you for attending. Thanks to the panelists. And then I'll see you 4 years from now.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.